It was a freezing January night in suburban Ohio, the kind where the air feels sharp and the silence of the streets feels too heavy. Detective Rachel Monroe and her partner, Officer Daniel Reese, were called to the elegant home of Judge Linda Marshall, one of Ohio's most prominent legal figures. Her husband, Peter, had been reported missing, not for days but for months. Neighbors described how Peter seemed to vanish without explanation, his absence quietly dismissed as work obligations or personal reasons. But something about that story didn't sit right with those who knew him. Monroe and Reese entered the pristine home, noting every polished surface and perfectly placed picture frame, yet there was a strange chill in the air, one that led them directly to the garage. The detectives opened the freezer, expecting nothing more than frozen meals and ice. What they found was unimaginable. There, wrapped tightly in layers of plastic, lay the frozen body of Peter Marshall, a man who had been missing for months. What drove one of Ohio's most respected judges to murder her husband and hide his body for months? This is a story of deception, secrets, and betrayal that will leave you questioning everything. This chilling tale began in the quiet suburbs of Dayton, Ohio, in early 2023. It was a neighborhood where everyone knew one another, where nothing out of the ordinary ever seemed to happen. At the heart of this seemingly idyllic community lived Chief Judge Linda Marshall, a woman whose reputation as a fair and commanding legal professional earned her immense respect. Linda and her husband, Peter Marshall, had been married for 20 years. On the outside, their lives seemed picture-perfect: a large house, a successful career for each of them, and 2 children thriving in college. Peter, a respected insurance executive, was known for his kind demeanor, always quick to offer a warm smile. Together, they seemed unshakable, the kind of couple others aspired to be. But then, in the spring of 2023, Peter disappeared. His colleagues first raised concerns after weeks of uncharacteristic silence. Peter was reliable to a fault, never missing a meeting or failing to respond to emails. Yet for months, there had been no word from him, not even a brief message. When asked, Linda calmly explained that Peter had decided to take some time away to focus on himself. It seemed plausible enough. However, neighbors began to notice things that didn't add up. The once lively couple's home seemed quieter than usual. Linda, typically sociable, kept to herself. Neighbors reported seeing her late at night, carrying heavy black bags to the garage. And those arguments, shouting matches that echoed through the neighborhood in the months before Peter vanished, were impossible to ignore. Still, Linda's explanation of Peter's absence held up for a while. She carried on with her daily life as though nothing had happened, attending court hearings, making public appearances, and even hosting a neighborhood charity event. But Peter's coworkers weren't convinced. After several failed attempts to reach him, they filed a missing person report, setting off a chain of events that would expose the unthinkable. For months, Peter's disappearance remained a mystery. Police conducted a welfare check at the Marshall home early in the investigation, but everything appeared normal. Linda, composed and cooperative, insisted Peter was simply away and needed space. But the absence of a man so deeply embedded in his community began to cast doubt. As whispers spread through the neighborhood, so did questions no one wanted to say aloud. And then, there was Mark Donovan. His name would eventually connect the missing husband to a far more complex story, one that no one saw coming. For months, Linda Marshall lived her life as though nothing had happened. But what had really happened to Peter? And how did the truth remain hidden for so long? The case of Peter Marshall's disappearance took a turn in the weeks following the missing person report. What initially seemed like a routine case of a husband stepping away from the pressures of life began to unravel into something far more disturbing. Detectives started their investigation by retracing Peter's last known movements. His bank accounts showed no activity for months, and his phone was turned off, leaving no digital trail. Linda remained cooperative, too cooperative. She repeated her story: Peter had left to clear his mind, and she had no idea where he had gone. Her calm demeanor unsettled the detectives, but they had no evidence to contradict her claims. As they delved deeper, they discovered cracks in the perfect life Linda had portrayed. Financial records revealed that Linda had been taking out significant loans in secret. Despite their outwardly stable lifestyle, she was drowning in debt, with much of it tied to a private account Peter didn't seem to know existed. These financial troubles pointed to a growing tension within the marriage, and when detectives interviewed Peter's closest friends, the picture became even darker. Peter had confided in a friend months before his disappearance, revealing he was planning to file for divorce. He suspected Linda was unfaithful, and he couldn't overlook the mounting strain on their finances. He had even started consulting with a divorce attorney, quietly preparing to separate from the woman he had loved for 2 decades. Linda, however, wasn't as discreet. Surveillance footage obtained from a local storage facility revealed her visiting a rented unit late at night, several times over the past few months. She was often seen carrying large, heavy bags. What was she storing? And why did she visit at such odd hours? Then came the tip. An anonymous caller reached out to the Dayton Police Department, reporting a strong, foul smell emanating from the garage freezer at the Marshall home. It wasn't the first time neighbors had noticed something odd. A couple living across the street remembered Linda hosting a backyard dinner party just weeks earlier, laughing and chatting as though nothing was amiss. Yet the freezer in her garage had been running non-stop, even during winter months. When detectives arrived with a warrant, Linda's calm exterior cracked. Her hands trembled as she stood by, watching officers inspect the garage. The freezer, locked with a padlock, was the focal point. As they forced it open, the nauseating stench confirmed their worst fears. Inside, wrapped meticulously in layers of plastic and duct tape, was Peter Marshall's body. Forensic examiners confirmed that Peter had been dead for months. The autopsy revealed he had died from blunt force trauma to the head. The freezer had preserved his remains, ensuring that the crime would eventually be discovered in its entirety. Linda's attempts to hide the body were as calculated as they were horrifying. Interviews with neighbors painted a chilling portrait of Linda's behavior in the months following Peter's disappearance. While most described her as composed, there were subtle signs that something wasn't right. One neighbor recalled Linda cleaning out the garage late at night, while another mentioned how she seemed detached, almost robotic, during social gatherings. Then came the emails. A forensic dive into Linda's computer uncovered correspondence between her and a man named Mark Donovan, a local attorney. The tone of the messages was unmistakable. This was no professional relationship. The two shared intimate details, flirtations, and plans to meet in secret. Peter's suspicions about infidelity were confirmed, but they came far too late to save him. As the evidence mounted, the investigators began piecing together a story of greed, betrayal, and desperation. But the discovery of Peter's body was only the beginning. The unraveling of Linda Marshall's life would expose secrets that shocked even the most seasoned detectives. What drove a respected judge to kill her husband, conceal his body for months, and carry on as though nothing had happened? The answer lay in a tangled web of lies and deceit, one that would soon come crashing down. The investigation into Peter Marshall's disappearance was no longer a missing persons case. The discovery of his body in the freezer turned the spotlight onto Linda Marshall, whose life had been built on justice and order. But as detectives began to dig deeper, the image of the respected judge began to crumble. The first major breakthrough came when detectives uncovered a name that had appeared subtly throughout their investigation: Mark Donovan. Mark wasn't just another attorney in Dayton, he was Linda's lover. For years, the two had carried on a secret relationship that neither Linda's husband nor her colleagues had known about. Their affair had been meticulously hidden, but Peter had started to suspect something long before his disappearance. Mark Donovan was everything Peter wasn't: charming, ambitious, and willing to bend the rules. He and Linda had met during a high-profile court case nearly 5 years earlier, and what started as a professional relationship quickly turned into something far more intimate. Email exchanges between the two revealed the depth of their connection. They spoke about running away together, leaving their current lives behind, and starting fresh. But there was a problem: Peter. Linda knew that Peter would never agree to a divorce quietly, and worse, he had evidence of her affair. Detectives found Peter's journal, hidden in a locked drawer in his office, where he detailed his growing concerns. One chilling entry read, "Linda thinks I don't know, but I've seen the emails. If she finds out I'm planning to leave, I don't know what she'll do." The journal wasn't the only piece of damning evidence. A voicemail Peter had left for a close friend just weeks before his disappearance sent shivers down the investigators' spines. In a hushed, trembling voice, he said, "If anything happens to me, look into Linda. She's not who she pretends to be." Peter had been preparing for a divorce, consulting with attorneys and documenting everything. He planned to expose the affair, knowing it could ruin Linda's career and reputation. But Linda was one step ahead. The timeline of events became increasingly clear. In the weeks leading up to his disappearance, Peter and Linda's arguments had grown louder and more frequent. Neighbors recalled hearing Peter accuse Linda of betrayal, while Linda screamed back about her career being at risk. Then came the storage unit visits. Surveillance footage captured Linda repeatedly entering late at night, often carrying bags large enough to hold evidence, or worse. Detectives suspected this was where she had stored incriminating items before deciding the freezer was a safer, more permanent solution. But the most chilling evidence of all was the freezer itself. Forensic analysis revealed traces of blood on the exterior, confirming that Peter's body hadn't been placed there cleanly. The autopsy indicated that Peter had been struck on the back of the head with a blunt object, likely while he was unaware. It was a calculated, cold-blooded act, designed to ensure he could never expose the affair. When detectives brought Linda in for questioning, her demeanor was unnervingly calm. She denied any involvement in Peter's disappearance, maintaining her composed, authoritative persona. But that facade began to crack when they presented her with the journal, the emails with Mark Donovan, and finally, the freezer evidence. Linda's hands trembled as they showed her the photos of Peter's lifeless body, frozen in plastic. Her voice faltered, and for the first time, she hesitated before answering questions. When pressed about the surveillance footage from the storage facility, she broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably. Her once commanding presence was gone, replaced by the desperation of someone who had run out of lies. The arrest was swift. Cameras captured Linda being led out of her home in handcuffs, her head bowed in shame. The community that had once celebrated her as a paragon of justice was left in shock, unable to reconcile the woman they admired with the cold-hearted killer she had become. A haunting reenactment of the freezer discovery, an officer opening the lid, the camera zooming in as muffled gasps and the sound of a plastic sheet unraveling filled the air. Slow pans over Peter's handwritten journal entries, with key phrases like "I don't know what she'll do" highlighted. Courtroom sketches of Linda sitting at the defendant's table, her face emotionless, juxtaposed with photos of her smiling at public events. A chilling voicemail overlay of Peter's voice saying, "If anything happens to me, look into Linda," as the screen fades to black. At the heart of this tragedy was a man who saw the danger too late, and a woman willing to risk everything to protect his secret. Linda Marshall, the judge who once stood for justice, now found herself on the other side of the courtroom, facing a reckoning she could no longer escape. The arrest of Linda Marshall sent shockwaves through Ohio's legal and social circles. A judge who had spent decades commanding respect and enforcing the law was now standing trial for the murder of her own husband. The courtroom was packed every day of the proceedings, with journalists, former colleagues, and even members of her family struggling to reconcile the Linda they thought they knew with the heinous crimes she had committed. The trial began in the summer of 2023. Prosecutors painted Linda as a cold and calculated killer, driven by a need to protect her career and reputation at all costs. They detailed the timeline of events leading up to Peter's murder, presenting the damning evidence: the freezer, Peter's journal, the emails with Mark Donovan, and the surveillance footage of Linda's late-night visits to the storage facility. But it was Peter's haunting voicemail, "If anything happens to me, look into Linda," that became the emotional core of the trial. Played repeatedly for the jury, it served as a chilling reminder of the fear he must have lived with in his final days. Linda's defense attempted to shift the narrative, portraying her as a woman pushed to her breaking point by a controlling husband. They argued that Peter's suspicions of the affair had led to a volatile and dangerous marriage. However, this claim fell flat against the overwhelming evidence, and Linda's cold demeanor on the stand did little to earn sympathy from the jury. Mark Donovan, Linda's lover, became another focal point of the trial. Though initially cooperative with investigators, his involvement in the affair and knowledge of the events leading up to Peter's death cast him in a suspicious light. While he denied knowing anything about the murder, prosecutors charged him as an accessory, citing emails in which he and Linda discussed being finally free to start their life together. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Linda Marshall was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Mark Donovan, while acquitted of accessory to murder, was convicted of obstruction of justice for his failure to report Linda's actions and received a 5-year sentence. The revelation of Linda's crime shattered the trust of the Dayton community. This was a woman who had symbolized integrity and fairness, someone entrusted to uphold the law. Her actions raised unsettling questions about the people we place in positions of power. Colleagues who had worked with Linda for years described feeling betrayed and disillusioned. One former court clerk commented, "If someone like Linda could commit such a horrific act, how do we trust anyone?" The community, too, grappled with its own sense of loss. Peter Marshall was remembered as a kind and generous man, and his memorial service drew hundreds of friends, neighbors, and colleagues. The tragedy of his murder left an indelible scar on the people who had once looked up to the Marshalls as a model family. While the trial concluded with Linda behind bars, the story didn't end there. Some of Peter's closest friends have raised questions about whether Linda acted alone. They point to Mark Donovan's role in her life and his evasive behavior during the investigation. Could he have known more than he let on? There were also inconsistencies in Linda's timeline that investigators could never fully account for. What were the contents of the black bags she carried into the storage facility? And why did she make repeated trips, even after Peter's body was placed in the freezer? These lingering mysteries have left some wondering if parts of the story remain untold. In the end, the story of Linda Marshall serves as a stark reminder of the darkness that can lurk beneath even the most polished exteriors. A woman entrusted with delivering justice instead used her intellect and power to commit an unspeakable crime. For Peter Marshall, justice came too late, but his story will never be forgotten. But now we turn to you. Do you believe the full truth came out during the trial? Was justice truly served, or is there more to this story than meets the eye? We want to hear your thoughts. Do you think Linda acted alone, or was there someone else pulling strings in the background? What about Mark Donovan? Do you believe his claims of innocence? Could there be more evidence out there that was never uncovered? Share your theories in the comments below. And if this story left you shocked, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more gripping cases like this one. These are stories that deserve to be told. Stories that remind us of the fragility of trust and the lengths people will go to keep their darkest secrets hidden. Don't forget to share this story with your friends and family, because sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction.